Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today as we continue our exploration into the impact of both poorly and well-managed assets within your workplace. I'm joined today again by Fallon Thompson, one of the brilliant minds behind OfficeSpace's brand new asset management platform. Fallon, as you know, creates products that empower facilities and workplace teams to act with confidence. Welcome, Fallon. I'm also joined by George Diaz, or JD as I know him, the head of InfoSec here at OfficeSpace. JD has spent the last 2 decades as an information and cybersecurity leader. Before joining OfficeSpace, he established the Information Security Office at LifeWorks and also led the cloud cybersecurity team at Morneau Chapelle, now TELUS Health. He's a staunch advocate for individual privacy rights and personal data security. JD and his team are constantly enabling everyone here at OfficeSpace to be more proactive about safeguarding our data by providing comprehensive training and educational resources. He's also several steps ahead of the curve, even as the security landscape evolves and cyber threats become more sophisticated. For our clients, he has helped develop rigorous security standards within the OfficeSpace platform to protect client data, including setting the bar higher than industry standard for responsible AI use and development. JD, thanks for joining us.
Wow. Thanks for that, Nick. Hi, everyone. Um, so
Yep.
to answer your question, yeah, indeed. There are a lot of devices that fall under the jurisdiction of an IT manager, and it goes beyond just laptops. So there's monitors, networking equipment, other peripherals, as well as their related warranties. Plus, you also have to consider all of the security, financial, and compliance data that's associated with each one of those items.
Okay. It sounds like as an IT, leader, you've got a lot to maintain and keep track of. So, we'll get into what that looks like to effectively manage all of that in a little bit. But first, I want to kind of hear about the current state of tracking all of this. It sounds like it can be a logistical nightmare. So, how are most teams logging all of that minutia associated with hardware and software at the facilities level? And what are some of the most important details they track?
Yeah, so obviously it's a lot. Like there is a ton of pertinent information linked to every single asset. And like who is it assigned to, the device's serial number, the location, from what country and what city, all the way down to the room number if it's on site. Now, and that doesn't even include the status, as in how well is the device functioning, or even if it's still in use, or when it was last serviced. Now, currently, a lot of companies struggle simply with naming an item so that it can be easily tracked. For example, to identify an item's owner, you may have to differentiate between a username from an email address, for security purposes.
Yeah.
So naming conventions, those can be a big factor. Also, you can't just put an ID sticker on a device and call it a day anymore. That information needs to be stored securely in a database. Um, and another thing that we need to keep in mind is that asset tracking can create a lot of manual work. Like I've seen a lot of teams that are trying to do a really good job and do all the right things, but they end up having that information stored in various places, like a spreadsheet here, or a system for this, or another system for that. And well, before you know it, asset management has turned into this big messy thing just because they lacked a comprehensive system to also input everything in just one place.
Yeah, I can see you're smiling, Fallon, because we've touched on manual tracking in previous talks with you. Uh, but JD, I'm curious, what are some of the consequences of not having a system to track all of those IT details?
Well, I can think of a few, but the first one that comes to mind is disjointed information. It can create confusion and it opens the door for gaps in process. Look, anyone in IT knows that pain firsthand. When you track things in a disconnected system, it's probably not going to be completely accurate. Um,
Hmm.
One example can be that when you move to a new facility, you have to make sure that you update the details of every record so that assets don't go missing. There has to be someone who can confidently say, where something is and whether or not it's still in use. Now, in the event of an audit, as another example, especially in highly regulated industries like government or healthcare, not having a clear picture of your asset management can cause you to fail. And of course, my favorite, security issues. If something hasn't been properly decommissioned and it gets misplaced, or you offboard an employee without recovering their device, you run the risk of a data breach.
Oh, okay. There's a lot at stake
Yeah.
here. Let's dive into that point of people like leaving a company without returning their device. Does this kind of thing happen often?
I did kind of set myself up for that one, didn't I? Um, yeah, so I actually do have some metrics for that. Now, Legal Dive did a study with over 200 executives who said that they lost at least 5% of endpoint devices when someone left the company. Now, even at that percentage, the security risks are high and so are the costs. Now, depending on the size of your company, that could easily be tens of thousands of dollars just out the door. And if I think about it, an example comes to mind. In a previous organization, we had an instance where a very kind former employee had not been asked to return their laptop. So they had to contact us to return it. And we were very thankful for their honesty, and luckily there were no security consequences, but we made sure to never let that happen again. I've also heard stories about workstations being stolen and zero action was taken by the company, aside from buying a new computer. I've heard about employees borrowing company devices, which no one asked them to return because the company had no idea they were missing. There's also some data from IBM that says that 60% of data breaches are from insider threats. Now, in in most cases, an employee leaving and not returning a laptop or still having access to company accounts is not intentional or nefarious. It's not really the fault of the employee, but in more cases than not, it's the company for not recovering a device or revoking that access on time.
Okay. So, I mean, those are some big potential consequences. And it's no coincidence that we called this the ghost story episode, because it sounds like you've got a few other scary stories or consequences of mismanaged IT assets that teams should be made
Yeah,
aware of.
a couple. Um,
Okay.
Another one that comes to mind is, well, take this, put your mind on this one. If you have a geographically diverse workforce, like many companies do today because of hybrid policies,
Yeah.
it can be really difficult to track where workstations are. Um, Employees might not even be aware that their workstation or their laptop is reaching end of life. Now, end of life is when a computer no longer receives security updates or patches or things like that. Meaning
Yeah.
that if your team doesn't have a way to identify those systems, you could end up having a vulnerable device in your environment, which again opens you up to risk. So knowing the who, when, and where of each device can really help you mitigate risk in that scenario.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, thanks for sharing those stories, JD. Let's turn the conversation over to Fallon for a minute to talk about how OfficeSpace Assets is specifically addressing a lot of those concerns. So, Fallon, saw you smiling through that. Obviously, a lot of familiar stories to you in terms of your research that you've done. Can you share how the platform helps IT leaders like JD get some peace of mind and kind of sleep at night?
Yeah, of course. I'm happy to. um,
Yeah.
I think a lot of it comes down to having just a centralized and real-time repository for your asset assignments. Knowing what assets you have, but also where they are and who's responsible for them. I think, like JD mentioned earlier, it's really critical for security audits, but also for like cost and depreciation tracking as well. So, like for instance, instead of saying, where is that device? Is it still with the intern from last summer, for instance? You can look in OfficeSpace assets and quickly say, okay, no, that device is assigned to JT. It's at his workstation. It's linked to his user and email. And oh, by the way, it's due for a replacement next month. In the case that JD also mentioned earlier, when someone's leaving a company, for instance, You can easily identify whether they still have that asset assigned to them, and you can take really quick action to recover it or revoke access. You have that high level view right from the start. And then in future state, you'll also be able to make it you could potentially make it part of your workflow by connecting asset management to your employee directory, where you could trigger reminders, for instance, to help collect that device when they're offboarding.
Right, that makes sense.
Yes.
So what kind of information can you track about a device within the platform, right? Like rather than in all these sort of different separate places.
Yeah. So I think what's great about OfficeSpace assets is you're able to get really, really granular with your security and compliance data, but also with some of that financial data that I mentioned as well. So you can track things like if an asset is in use or retired. And then on the financial side, you can log warranty expiration dates, end of life dates, depreciation methods, etc. And then from there, you can automate reminders so you know when to replace something, and you also have that accurate information. We really want to take as much as we can off the plate of the managers that are managing these assets. No longer is it you have to remember what this data was. You have to remember when to check in on these assets. We want to have it that central repository where you have all that data at your fingertips. And then when it comes to avoiding that kind of shadow IT component, you know which approved devices are in your system, which ones you're tracking. And so if somebody is using something that maybe isn't approved or a part of your inventory, it's much, much, much easier to recognize that and then ultimately take action. We think this will help discourage employees from using, let's say, rogue devices, because they know that their devices are being accurately tracked, and someone will know. So,
yeah, that really makes sense. Okay, so back over to you, JD, for a minute. You and your team are dedicated to maintaining robust security standards for our platform and also keeping tabs on asset inventory. So, you've put very effective systems and processes in place, but I imagine it takes a lot of manual effort to uphold that level of and that standard. So, how do you see OfficeSpace assets supporting you and the team, and the most, to make the most of making your role easier?
Yeah, so the way that I look at it is that, well, by centralizing, integrating, and automating, if we can become partners to not just IT, but also to all those teams that are responsible for asset tracking, as well as onboarding and offboarding of employees, if we can help increase your level of confidence in understanding the status of your assets while tying that to a personnel process and make managing office tech easier, then I feel like we've done our job.
Okay, thank you. Well, that's actually the conversation we've got for today. So I'd like to just thank you both for joining us, and thank you for joining us live. If this conversation has struck a chord with you and you're interested in learning more about asset management and OfficeSpace's latest solution, be sure to join us for our live launch day event this next week after next on June 24th at 10 a.m. Pacific time, 1 p.m. Eastern, and details and the link to register will be posted in the comments below. We'd love to see you there. We'll have some prizes. It'll be a bit of a fun time. So, but thanks again for joining us, and a huge thanks to JD and Fallon for all your insights. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank
Thanks
you
all.
so much, y'all.
Cheers.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.